Hello and welcome back to another riveting episode of Wrench's Gadgets and Hacks. How did I forget the hacks? It's weird. The hacks are so good now that AI is just doing them for me.
There you
Just
go.
in case you weren't sure, Wrench's Gadgets and Hacks, the podcast for the curious in the AECO that like technology. That's what we're here for. And it's never just me. Here is my C# to my JavaScript, my iMac to my VIC-20, and my motley crew to my tragically hip, the co-host with the mostest, John Pearson. Welcome back,
How's
sir.
it going? Glad to be here. Thanks again. I like those intros you do. They're always fun.
Spectacular. And I'd like to keep you guessing. You never know what's going to come out of those yin and yangs that we do.
Oh, for sure.
So last episode, for those of you following along at home, we had sort of talked about what is vibe coding, and then we said, okay, vibe coding has all this really cool stuff, this really good stuff. But we alluded to that with the good comes the bad. And this episode, we're going to focus on the not so good of vibe coding, the things that can improve and what all comes with the bad of vibe coding. And while it may seem a little bit negative, you kind of have to take the good with the bad. Everyone says that to make sure we understand how we can move on to what we're talking about next week, which is the reality. What really is vibe coding at this moment in time? So before we hop into the bad, what are your thoughts at this moment, John? We talked about the good, and there was a lot of good stuff about vibe coding, but even then, a couple times we sort of said, but, and we kind of got into the
Yeah,
less good.
absolutely. That was easy to get into, especially since I was like pretty deep into it with the thing that I'm playing with on the side just for fun. Yeah, I have a lot. I don't know where to start.
Just dive right in.
So I think so. Last time we talked about the good, getting to a something usable really fast, right?
Yeah.
I talked about Gemini, I think, just chatting with it, and it shows you right in the chat interface. What do they call it? I forgot what they call it. It's a preview that they offer in there. So it's a canvas, I think is the name that they call it. So really nice. You could start to get feedback really fast and say, change this button. I don't like this color. It should do this, etc. That's really fun. And I was able to get to my little note-taking app endpoint really quick, or at least a usability standpoint, I guess is the right way to say that, not endpoint. The bad is on Gemini is I was like, okay, how do I make this have like real storage and be like on a URL? I wanted to put this to where I can go to a .com and use it. And it kind of like scaffolded it out and told me like I need to use Firebase for my storage and authentication with Google and all this stuff. Because in Gemini, it lets you store locally during the conversation for your app. And when I started asking it to do that, my context had gotten so big, my chat was so long that it just wouldn't build the app anymore. And it kind of scared the heck out of me. I was like, oh no, I'm like losing my app now. And yeah, I ended up having to revert a bunch of code and then getting the HTML from it and moving on from Gemini pretty quickly after I got something usable. We could probably include a screenshot in the blog post that follows up with this of my initial what I could see in Gemini
Absolutely.
because I think it's cool to see where it came from, and it's super usable. It's just yeah, to actually deploy it for me to use it on my phone and sync between like a computer and a phone, it can't stay in Gemini forever, right? Yeah, that was a pretty interesting roadblock I hit is when it wouldn't render the app anymore because it was doing a single HTML file that was like thousands of lines. And I was like, oh my goodness. And I think you mentioned to me Google AI Studio is probably a better place to start if
It,
you're actually wanting to build something usable.
yeah. Well, especially if you're working with Google stuff. Like Gemini is a good one when you get there, but all of them that I've played with, once you get past a certain point, it becomes very tough. Like you say, once you move out of hundreds of lines to thousands of lines, it gets a little tricky. It can't remember what it talked about at the beginning of your code at the bottom. And that's one of the bad things is that you have that limited context window, and it's always improving. Now with a lot of the platforms, ChatGPT, Claude, you have this idea of projects. I'm doing air quotes for those of you not watching. And the idea is that with these projects, you can have multiple chats in that same project. And so now the AI has context within that project. So if you say,
Hmm.
hey, look at 3 chats ago to find this piece of code or to understand this, it will let you do that. The other thing that it does is you can also store things inside of that project. And so if you need to review something in that project, it can review what's been stored. Like say you uploaded a markdown file, and it's a lot less expensive. Doesn't take as much tokens because it can review that in RAG. Basically just means it's retrieval instead of reading it from start to end. So there's definitely some ways to get around that. But even at that point, you're always running hits. It's not like, when you're running a project and you have unlimited space on your desktop or your computer to run it and store it. It's all the same. But when you have to go back to the beginning and start, there's absolutely some roadblocks to come into. And all of this that we've been talking about, at least on my end, we're talking about the paid version of the platform. If you're dabbling in the free version, no harm, no foul, you want to try before you buy sort of scenario, then you're really limited with what it can do and how much context you get. And that's where it starts to get really frustrating is, I'm so close,
Hmm.
or at least it feels like you're so close, but the end is nigh. It's not there. It's not
Yeah.
there.
It stinks when you hit a limit too. So like especially if you're getting into like a good groove. So like there's so many apps too. I've spent a lot of time on Reddit looking at other apps, and like one thing is I wanted to be able to like be on my phone and like tell it modify the app like this, modify the app like this. So there's like all these different apps now that are like out on phones. There's like one called like V0, which I've been
Hmm.
using as
Yep.
well, Vercel. That one was okay. It required me to put an API key in, I think, for Grok, and
Hmm.
I had Grok's Twitter's AI, and it used a ton of credits. Like not a ton, but like I use the AI key for projects myself through Grok, and I've used like pennies, like 5 cents, for like all my note taking app that I'm playing with. This used like a quarter, like in 10, 20 minutes, it used a whole quarter. Like, compared to me serializing all these like hundreds of notes that I've been playing with and asking AI about them and everything, that was like kind of like, oh man, I'm gonna burn through $5 really fast. $5 lasted me months with just my AI key, API key.
Yep.
And then there's another one called Vibe Code that's on iPhones. I couldn't get it to work very good. I got it to make something, but it was an endless loop, the app. So that was kind of frustrating. And every time I start in one of these new platforms, I had Gemini write a summary of the app. I told it summarize this app for an LLM to recreate it from scratch. So I've been using that in each one that I try, and yeah, it's gotten really weird. Another one that I use is called Replit.
Yeah. Replit.
I don't know how that's pronounced. I spent $15 and it's for $25 credit. I burned through that credit in one day, prompting back and forth. So like one of the bad things is if you don't really know what you're asking it to do or you're throwing a lot at it, you can burn through your monthly quota and very fast. And if you're wanting to keep seeing results, it's kind of hard. So I've had a lot of really good experiences with Cursor. That's kind of where I've landed a lot is Cursor. Even the free, you get like a week trial. Cursor's been really good because it can start to edit the files and be a little more conscientious of the token usage too. But deploying it, you have to kind of figure out how to deploy it too, which is kind of the other hard part if you want to have it accessible beyond just your computer. But yeah, each one of these platforms has worked good. I've had a lot of success with Replit, but I burned through that credit really fast,
Yeah, and
which
and
was
that's
crazy.
that's definitely one of the bad sides is budgets and how it's done. And as you mentioned, there's so many platforms out there, but the problem is they're taken from Peter to pay Paul because they're sitting on top of Claude or ChatGPT or something else. So if they charge you 5 credits, they have to give two to the, it's like any store, any retail environment. And that's why
Yeah.
when you're doing your own back end, the takeaway is much less because there's no middleman, no middle person in the middle to do that. And of course, these platforms have to make money as well to give those free trials, and so it's kind of that never ending cycle. But it's so hard when you're doing that on either platform, and sometimes when you're spending a fraction of a penny versus a quarter, you don't really care, but you don't know when you ask a question if it's going to be a short, concise answer that costs pennies, or it's going to give you a 500-page report that costs dollars. You just never know.
Yeah. And like starting to have a concept of what a token is too has been really interesting to me. It's like, what the heck is a token? It's just kind of crazy. So I've been looking at that a lot for my own usage. So I have some, it takes notes. So you write notes down. It's a virtual sticky board is kind of like what, or a junk drawer, as I told you, Carl, to throw notes in. So you type a note. Did a podcast with Carl today. We talked about the bad of AI. It will summarize it and auto tag the note. So it uses Grok AI to do that. And I'm throwing notes at it, you know. So I've learned really quick that tokens are kind of something that you can get through pretty quick too if you're not careful. So one of the things is like I talked to Carl today. If I like look at that for Grom, the amount of tokens it uses is 6. They have a tokenizer on their API dashboard, which is really great. If you strip things like I and maybe the word, so if you just change it to talked to Carl today, it takes 6 tokens instead of 7. So when you see models telling you like 1,000,000 tokens is $3, this is 6 or 7 of those tokens and it adds up. So I started to optimize my own notes in that way to where it takes the raw note, strips out like all of these words, and then it uses less tokens as well, which is kind of nice. I wrote a function in JavaScript thanks to Cursor that does that. So that was kind of nice. But that was one of the bad, but also like a really enlightening learning point is the way we talk might not necessarily be the way the LLM needs to hear it. One of the things I saw was like from The Office, the show The Office. There's an episode where Kevin is talking in very short sentences and throwing out words. He's all me, I think, talking hard. Like he uses like weird ways to talk to save time. That's kind of how an LLM likes to hear it and use less tokens, which I think is kind of interesting too. So yeah.
It's very interesting when you think of that. And the best way that I've heard tokens kind of broken down is think of it like syllables. So like each syllable is going to cost you a token because it's not a word, because it's based on the letters. It's a whole bunch of really weird stuff that I just can't wrap my head around. But the best way that I've heard it described is think of it as syllables. And like you say, 1,000,000 is pretty good. The other thing is that putting it in takes less tokens than getting it out. So you'll also notice when you look at the models, you'll see that an input token you get 1,000,000 for $3, but an output token you get 250,000 for that $3, or 1,000,000 costs you $7.
Yeah.
So getting it in there is one thing, but then it has to chew on it, think about it, and spit it back out, and that thinking costs more money, and that sort of brings us all the way around loop to it can get very expensive. And it's one thing to use any of these tools to prototype. But as John's alluding to, once you decide, okay, I'm going to become a millionaire because I made this vibe coding tool, and you put it out in the world, well, those costs go up as more people start using your wonderful tool. It all costs, and that's why you can't just use LLMs everywhere for free, and they all have these limits, because somebody's got to pay for the electricity and all the wonderful things that run these data centers that everybody's madly building right now.
Exactly. Yeah, it's crazy. And I think too, another thing, like I'm kind of spoiled from like being in ChatGPT or Grok or something and just chatting with it, kind of like to no end, right? You're just like, okay, just keep on asking questions. How do you do this? What's this recipe? What's this? But then when it comes to actually building something like for vibe coding, like getting an app as an output, there's some limits there. So that's been kind of like crazy too. I will throw it out there for hosting, playing around with. It was right there. I told you what it was too. Netlify.
Netlify, so yes, I've used that as well.
Netlify is huge, and it's like really cool because it has a really generous free tier actually, and then it hooks to a GitHub repo, which is really, really neat. Yep. That's another is like version control. Years ago, when I was building Rhythm, migrating it to C# from Python, I didn't have it on GitHub as a project at one point, and I lost all my code at some point because I did something dumb on my laptop. So I learned about version control really quick. So having a GitHub repo set up with your code, especially with vibe coding, is huge. So every time I use Cursor to make a change, I commit that to the repo as like a snapshot. So like for Revit users out there, it's like syncing with Central. You know, like you have a sync with Central, add comments to your sync if you can or whatever, and you have a snapshot in time. GitHub's really good for that, and Netlify lets you deploy from GitHub, which is pretty cool. So that's another kind of just tip that I learned too. And with Gemini, it has snapshots, but like a GitHub repo is just like tried and true, you know. And with Cursor attaching to a GitHub repo, it's like been really nice. You can have branches too, so I'll have explorations where I'm trying like a new UI for my tool, and it'll be its own branch that builds as like another build. So that's been nice as well for testing. Because my wife and I are both playing with this Notes app now, so now I'm on the hook for if I break something because I have two of us using it.
Now it's real.
Yeah. So it's been kind of fun in that way too. But yeah, version control. I think even if you're using like a Gemini or something that's just in chat, save out the file on your own to a GitHub repo and just keep on saving it because GitHub's free. So just go for it, you know.
Yep. Yep. And even if you're not into Git or Git scares you, just every time you have a chat session or a conversation, just save the code. Just save
Yeah,
it, and then
something.
so there's always a backup. Just something like say, because there's nothing worse than even if AI's done the heavy lifting, spending a week or two on something and it's just gone.
Yeah, all of a sudden it just not load. Gemini explorations, it just wouldn't load, and I was like, oh no, you know. And then that's when I moved to Cursor plus a Git repo. But yeah, the other side of that, though, if you're using GitHub and you have GitHub Copilot, which is their agent that lets you chat with it and ask questions and edit code, GitHub Copilot will make changes without asking sometimes. Like if you tell it fix this and show me how to fix this in my code, it might just do it without like a pull request. Pull request is like relinquishing your elements in your Revit model. Like you're asking it to make changes and let go of those items. Oftentimes when you're coding something, you open a pull request, review it, and then merge it. Copilot sometimes can and will make changes without a PR. It'll just go, okay, I'll change that. And it just does it, and it's very confident. I had a few things that broke my deployment when I asked it to do something. I told it to simplify my code base, clean it up, and it really cleaned it up. Like it was just like 5 lines in the index.html, right? Like it was crazy.
I have been down there as well, and it's definitely that is one of the bad is AI is always confident, but it's not always right. It's not always right for what you want, and sometimes it's just plain out hallucinating. So this is where the backups come into play and being very concise or when you're talking to it to say, I don't want you to rewrite the entire code. I want you to focus on this one piece, this one tool, this one section, which leads to another part that I always sort of suggest as a bad when you're going through this is you've probably heard that there's the 80-20 rule where, 80% of the work gets 20% of the outcome, or 20% of the work and 20% or 80% of what you do for 20% of the effort. Yeah, that's how it goes. 80% of the outcome for 20% of the effort. With vibe coding, very much different. That first 80% seems like nothing. Like John said, you talk to a whatever your vibe coding platform, there's something there. That next 15% to get it to an actual product to release is painful, but it's slow progress. That final 5% is like pulling teeth. Like getting
Yeah.
something final done is really, really hard. And that's where sort of, vibe coding apps go to die. That final 5% of really getting it done. It looks good. I can run it here, but where do I deploy it? How do I make it work? What do I do? And that's why some platforms like Claude, and I think ChatGPT with its custom GPTs, where you can sort of deploy things on the system. They're very simple, very rudimentary. You can share them out, but they're never going to be an actual product, at least not something that you want to monetize and become something going down. If you just want to share something internally with the office, that's what they're good for. Just like going back
Mm-hmm.
to Dynamo, you have a graph, you can share it internally, but as you make that migration to say, hey, this should be an add-in, we're going to put it in C# and we're going to do this and going to do that, you have to change platforms. You have to have a different strategy. And vibe coding is great for prototyping. It's bad, hence the bad, for being the product.
It's it's interesting for sure. And like that's one thing I like on Twitter I follow like coding stuff. So like that's what I've interacted with a lot. So like the algorithm shows me more of the vibe code stuff lately too. And a lot of times someone's like, look at this app I built. And then there's always people in the comments that are like, how are you handling user authentication, GPDR requests, all this? Because people have ideas and they're just trying it like more than ever, which is pretty neat. But like when you start thinking about that stuff, it's really weird. Authentication, security, all of that. Like right now for my little note taking app, like I'm just writing notes in it. It's like it's like a weird thing. The database just stores everything, right? Like I can see the database. So I was like, that's kind of weird. Like if I wanted to go look at notes, I could technically, being like the database admin, right? And like I think that's like a truth of apps, unless they say they encrypt, that we just all accept. So now my app, it actually encrypts after you type in a note, has an encryption key that's user specific and it encrypts to the database. And then when you receive your data, it decrypts it back to you. I added that because I was like, I want to practice doing that, you know, because if I ever made this something where other people can use it, I don't want to like accidentally see a note from someone else, you know, or something. And then it's just like nice. It just feels like the right thing to do, encrypt someone's data. I mean, right?
Absolutely. And that's definitely one of the bads is privacy. Where's your
Yeah.
data? How do we secure this thing? Authentication. How does it grow? How does it scale? All of these things are inherently hard, and I think they're inherently hard for a reason, because the idea behind vibe coding, at least at the start, is like you say, I have this really cool idea. Can it become a thing? And in the past, you'd hire a developer and you'd spend months or years and lots of money to get to the stage where, yes, this is good, no, this isn't. And now you can do that very quickly. Problem
Mm-hmm.
is that high of doing it very quickly, things like, oh well, this is a complete product, here you go, and give it out to the world. And we've all seen those, like you say, the threads on X or Reddit or whatever, where somebody said, oh, this is perfect, I just put it out there and I left my API key, and now I have $10,000 in API key call
Man,
bills and all that sort of stuff. So
that's a scary thing. Like leaking like an API key or an AWS key for Amazon, like oh my goodness, and then you can have thousands and thousands of dollars all because you thought you could make a perfect recipe app or something.
yep.
Craziness. And like if you follow a lot of like these really hype people on any social media, they're like, you should be able to retire right now if you make this app, you
Yeah.
know, and they make it just seem like it's so easy to do too. But there's always one of the things I like not to dwell on the bads, I guess, like to maybe push a good out there is like it kind of helps you learn too, like start thinking about this stuff, like I don't know, thinking about like how your database is designed, where you're hosting, what your front end looks like. That's been really interesting for me because I've used Netlify in the past to publish a blog. When I started looking at hosting, I was like, can I publish this on Netlify? And you can, and they have a lot of templates. So it's learning from it's really cool in that way too. You might not, the bad things, you might not make something that you can technically sell, but you might learn a lot along the way, which is like the good part of that, I guess.
And we're back to the bad and the good. So we talked about the bad when we were talking about the good. Now the good's creeping into the bad. That's kind of what the next episode about is the reality, the real deal of what this is all about. For me, some of the other things that are firmly in the bad category, and this kind of leads into what you're talking about. The good is the learning, the bad is getting complacent. I can
Yeah,
talk to it, it'll do something, and when we first started, like, no, 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 I don't want that font. No, I don't want that color. No, it needs to do this. And now you're like, that looks pretty good.
yeah,
Claude said this was good. It's always happy. It's always jolly. It tells me I'm perfect every single time.
yeah,
Then this must be great. Don't worry
yeah,
about any authentication or security. It's good. Look how good it looks. And
yep,
that's how it kind of works. Now, the other funny thing, and I'll just tease this because I want to talk about it in the reality, is that sometimes what you know is not what other people know, and vice versa. So you don't know what you don't know, I guess, is how that saying goes. And I was doing a hackathon, and we'll talk about hackathons in a whole different episode. But when you don't know, I shared what I had made with vibe coding, and a bunch of the front end developers that know all this stuff go, oh, that's bootstrap, yada yada yada, and like they knew the template, and they knew, like, because that's what AI does. They all look the same. But when you're new to it,
yeah.
you're like, hey, this is great. And then you see 10,000 websites that look exactly the same. Oh, now I get it.
Wait a minute.
Part of the bad.
Yeah, Yeah, it's definitely like you start to see people say a lot of these like purple glowing websites, right? Like that's what I've seen a
Yep.
comment on as well. And I know that mine's a Bootstrap template, I'm pretty sure.
Yep.
Bootstrap's very popular protocol theming as well, but yeah,
It's easy,
crazy.
and when you start off again, when you're prototyping it, and when you're creating an app with back end functionality, you just want that back end to work. So the front's not a high
Yeah.
priority to start. You want it to look good, but we're not finalizing, and that's what comes into play, which I think leads to the next thing is when you get stuck in those loops. And we mentioned this a little bit earlier. You hit a limit, whether you're paid or not paid. They have limits on everything, and I'm 3 keyboard strokes away from finishing what they do for the day, and this, oh, well, you have to wait 5 hours, or you have to wait a week.
Yeah.
It's just infuriating.
Yeah.
And the other side of that is when you get further on in a chat. So I've heard that you've got about 45 to 50 requests or back and forth in a chat before it kind of degrades to not being helpful. And sometimes you don't realize how far down that rabbit hole you are. And can you remove this code and do this? Okay, sure. Here you go. And you're like, wait a minute. This is exactly the same. No, this is what I want you to do. Okay, sure. Here you
Yep.
go. And an hour later, you're like, I just spent an hour and it never gave me anything different. It's all the same. You're pulling your hair out and I don't have much.
Yes.
So that's part of that bad is you get stuck in that, and you're just
Yeah.
one prompt away from getting it done, but that prompt never happens, at least not in that session.
Yeah. And I think that's another like plus for GitHub is if you have it attached, if you have cursor attached to a project that's on GitHub and you have GitHub desktop open, you can verify if it made changes actually too. It normally shows you like in cursor if it made changes, but GitHub like will not lie. Like it'll show you here's the diff between the files. So if it touched more files than you expected, it will tell you too. So that's another plus one for GitHub, using GitHub at least.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I've
it's
I've seen, again, I'm a big Claude fan. That's what I use, and they've kind of implemented that into it. So it'll be writing the code in the background. You don't necessarily see it. You can't have the canvas, whatever they call it, where you see it, but you don't actually see it. It just shows you the difference. Added 3 lines, removed 3 lines. But the problem, and this goes back to that tokenization, is that if you have 1,000 lines of code and it's changing one line, but it tells you it rewrote it, it really did rewrite it. It's just the same stuff. So only 2 lines of code changed, but it used 1,000 lines worth of tokens to make that one line change. So that's a trick you learn very quickly, to be very specific with
yeah,
just deal with this little section, because your precious tokens disappear quickly.
absolutely. That's for sure too. Yeah. It's so you use Claude. Are you on like a free plan?
I was on a free pan, then you have to get into, whenever you really want to start using projects and save stuff and keep your stuff private, paid is the way to go.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't looked at Claude. I saw that they had like a 24-hour like if you sign up you get something for free, pro for
Yeah,
free for like a week or two. And I tried and I already had an account. I didn't know. So I was like, dang it.
well, and that's, I don't know if this is good or bad. I think it's probably good, but 2 months ago, you never got free trials. Like, you got the free version,
Mm,
but you didn't get a free trial. And it's funny, I've been a paid user of Claude for a couple months now, but I still like ChatGPT for like just writing stuff, not code stuff, but like, look at this tweet or look at this email, things like that. And the free version is fine for that. But I asked it a code question just to verify, and it said,
uh,
"Hey, would you like to have a free 30-day trial of our paid version and use Codex?" And
oh,
it did, completely free, 30 months, full functionality. And then when I did that, I logged out of Claude for, I can't remember why. I think I cleaned my cookies, so I logged out. And when I logged back in, before I had logged in, it said, "Hey, would you like to have a 30-day free trial?" And I'm like, I haven't seen this, and but we must be at the stage now where people are saying, "Hey, I
cool.
want to get a little more functionality. I want to try," and then that you can try the security features and all the other stuff that come into play. And both of those platforms, Claude and ChatGPT, now have coding specific ones. So it's Claude Code or Codex,
Okay.
and they can both be added into, I use VS Code as add-ins that do the same thing that Cursor or Windsurfer or what's the other one, GitHub Copilot do. You're just using that as the back end. And even with
Very
Cursor, you can
cool.
choose to use Claude or OpenAI or whatever you want as your
Hmm.
LLM of choice on the back end.
And then is Cloud Code, I know this is, we have to talk about the bad, I guess, but is Cloud Code in the browser?
So it just came out. It was a beta a while ago. I think it's just released as in the browser, but it started as a command line interface. So you type in,
That's what I saw
yeah,
initially. Okay, because if I see command line interface, like I'm kind of out a lot of the time.
the
Like
same.
every
I
time I see someone like, open command line, I'm like,
yeah.
okay, so no then.
So which is part of the bad, but they've all started to realize that vibe coders aren't necessarily coders or, the people that like to do terminal stuff. So when I first tried Claude Code, you had to download it and install it on your terminal, but then you could link it to things like VS Code. And then a month later, there's an actual VS Code plugin. And now,
Yes.
if you like using the web interface, they have a UI. It's very basic. It's not the same as the chat UI, but it
Okay.
allows you to do it right in the web, the UI interface, if you want.
That's very cool. Yeah, I didn't realize that. Like, because on the web tells me that I could probably like sit on my iPad and do it, which I think is pretty neat.
And actually,
Who
you
knows?
can if you do that. Very similar now that they've even got VS Code in the cloud. You can run your VS Code from that, so you could absolutely do that.
Pretty cool. I'll have to check it out. Because that's like, I guess that's one for the bad is like a lot of this stuff's like on a full laptop, right? In the terminal or VS Code on the laptop, or I think Cursor's only on like a computer. I don't think there's any kind of web.
Yep.
So like, I found like, I don't know, like I'm in the backyard. I don't know. I'd like to just tell it, fix this because it's on my mind. You know, as I like, think of stuff, I have two options. I can create a GitHub issue on my repo to remind myself, or I can just ask the agent to do it. I really, really just want to be able to like basically text an agent and say, "Hey, the app really should do this," and it's like, "Let me try. Here's
Yep.
a fresh deployment." That's like the dream that I have.
And they're getting closer, so you can do Claude or ChatGPT. A lot of them, you can actually interface with it on a phone, either texting or talking, and it will do for me anyways. It will do the coding, but I can't see it. I can't interact with the code. That's not how I like to see it. And what I do is I tend to use an app that you and I both like. You might use SERP with your app, but the voice notes, I'll use that. I'll take a conversation. And what I like about that is it'll transcribe. It doesn't summarize,
Hmm.
but it will transcribe. It will do both. But I like the transcription because then I can take that and put it into my prompt
Oh
and say,
yeah.
and it goes from there. I don't want to spoil anybody's beliefs of what happens with this podcast, but things like that happen in the background when we summarize these podcasts for the notes, right? You don't want to read
Yeah.
30 minutes of notes, you want a minute. So that's what these
Yeah.
AI tools are great for.
That's a really cool use case is like take the voice note and just throw that into the prompt while it's on your mind. So that kind of addresses my use case of like I'm out walking the dog and I think of something the app should do, just jot it down, kind of, which I think is a really cool use case.
And I got
Somehow GitHub Copilot works with issues. I'm not sure how, but yeah, you were saying?
I was just saying that I got a lot of that from Adam Thomas. He's famous for his walk and talks, likes to get to the office and walk
Yeah,
around. But the same thing, just talk to the AI,
yeah,
and even if it's just a conversation to remember it gets it down, it puts it in there. Again, a lot of tokens. So if you're talking to it for a long time, you can pay the piper, but you know you just need to be
yeah,
aware.
yeah. Just kind of keep an eye on it, and like I think I've come to the discovery that like if you really want to keep testing it, you probably do need to pay something per month. I think that's one of the bad. Probably we'll talk about it more in the reality, but one of the bads like you'll only get so far for free. I think is one thing I've found.
Yep. 1,000%. And I think like anything else, just like your Netflix subscription or your Prime, where you used to not have commercials and now you do, at some point you come to the realization that the extra couple dollars a month is worth it for what you get for what you do. And either it is or it isn't. And if it's not, there's 15 different platforms you can do where you can use the free until you run out and move in. One that I always tell people about is u.com, and it's just a multi-headed engine, so you can choose whatever AI you want. And so say you're using ChatGPT, you use whatever your free allotment is, and when it says you're done, you go to u.com and you get that again. You're just through a different interface. So basically you
Yeah,
get
yeah,
double for no money. Well, there's always a catch somewhere, but that's
yeah,
time for a different podcast.
yeah, yeah. Yep. Go on
um,
to that one for a while.
And with that, we are getting ready to bring this bird in for a landing. So before we sign off, any last thoughts on the bird?
No, I think I don't let the bad scare you. I think it's one piece of feedback I have. With everything, there's always like there's, it's not like this straight up. It's like this hills and valleys situation. And it's very much like that with this. You are going to encounter bad things. You'll break stuff, but that's all part of the fun. I like breaking stuff. That's like how I learn a lot. So deconstructing things.
Yep.
And that's one thing too, is like a lot of these platforms will give you the code to look at and you can start learning, which is really great. So sometimes the bad, that's where some of the best stuff's found.
Absolutely. I used to say that all the time in my Revit training, is that when you make a mistake and do something wrong, you learn way more than if you don't.
Absolutely.
So it's exactly the same with vibe coding or anything AI for that matter.
Yep, for sure.
All right. And with that, the bird is down. I want to thank you all for joining us again for another episode of Wrenches, Gadgets, and Hacks, where we explore the tools, techniques, and time-saving hacks that are shaping the future. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe again somewhere down here, and stay tuned for more insights into the exciting world of AECO and technology. Until next time, keep building, innovating, and exploring the possibilities.